we discussed the inheritance. Inheritance can be trained. That means a superclass can also be derived from another class. Like here, we have a graded activity is inherited from the general object class. Pass-fail activity is derived from graded activity, and pass-fail exam is derived from pass-fail activity. Or the other things you can think of, a dog is a pet, right? But then a Labrador is a dog. In this case, dog is a parent class or a superclass of Labrador, but the dog is also a subclass of a pet. So these are the things that you can imagine of an inheritance chain. Classes often are depicted graphically in a class hierarchy. A class hierarchy shows the hierarchy inheritance relationships between classes. For example, is a final exam inherits from graded activity. As same thing is a pass-failed activity inherits from graded activity. All Java classes are directly or indirectly derived from a class called object. Object is in the Java Learn package. Any class that does not specify the extends keyword is automatically derived from the object class. Ultimately, so every class is derived from the object class because no matter how you define your superclass and subclass, that superclass must come from somewhere, and this somewhere is this object class, which is already defined in the Java package. Because every class is directly or indirectly derived from the object class, every class inherits the object class's members. For example, like toString and equals. In the object class, the toString method returns a string contains the object's class name and the hash of its memory address. And the equals method accepts the address of an object as its argument and returns true if it is the same as the calling object's address. A reference variable can reference objects of class that are derived from the variable's class. We can use the exam variable to reference a graded activity object. Like here, it's called exam, but it's actually graded activity, and you use the keyword new graded activity. The graded activity class is also used as a superclass for the final exam class. So as we said, final exam class is a graded activity object. A graded activity variable can be used to reference a final exam object. Here comes the fun part, polymorphism. This exam object is defined as a graded activity, but when you do a new, you are creating a final exam object. There's no issue for Java to accepting that because the final exam is a graded activity, right? So this code has no problem. But here, you are referencing this exam as a graded activity in compiler. So you will only be able to use this graded activities method. This statement creates a final exam object and stores the object's address in the exam variable. This is the example of polymorphism. The term polymorphism means the ability to take many forms. Poly means multiple. Morphism is changing different forms. In Java, a reference variable is polymorphic because it can reference objects of types different from its own, as long as those types are subclass of the type. So now we are creating a whole bunch of graded activities, but each of them is of a different subtype. They are graded activity, there's no problem. But inside the graded activity, there are still differences. The graded activity class has three methods, setScore, getScore, and getGrade. All the three inherits these three methods. Oops. Now you can see you can get point, get grade. However, because you define this exam in the graded activity, as a graded activity, you cannot use subclass method. That's because Java virtual compiler, when it sees this object, it only knows it's a graded activity. It does not know it has more. It's actually a part of a subclass. If you have overridden a method in a superclass, if the variable makes a call to the superclass version, will be run. So Java will perform a dynamic binding or late binding when the variable contains a polymorphism reference. So if you have, everybody have a set score method, right? You can call the set score method of graded activity. But if the subclass overrides that set score method, then in the end, the subclass's version of the method will be run. So when you combine polymorphism and overriding and the dynamic binding, which means when the variable contains a polymorphic reference, the Java virtual machine will determine at the runtime which method to call, depending on the type of object. So this is really powerful because then you can simplify your code much more by overriding the same method and define subclasses that make the Java program really versatile. It's the object type rather than the reference type that determines which method is called. An example is polymorphic. You cannot assign a superclass object to a subclass reference though, because a superclass object is not a subclass reference object.